As the fiction freak, I do love me some characters from any genders, but since I identify myself as a man, I identify more with characters that are also men. And linked to that idea, there are few things for me that are sadder than a broken man. So allow me to take you on a journey full of sorrow, but also full of hope and love, because today we're talking about Arthur Morgan from Red Dead Redemption 2. And more specifically, we're talking about one of his most intimate scenes. As always, to enjoy the moment at its fullest, we need to understand what led to this moment. A bit of context then. After a robbery goes badly wrong in the western town of Blackwater, Arthur Morgan and the Van der Linde gang are forced to flee. With federal agents and the best bounty hunters in the nation massing on their heels, the gang must rob, steal, and fight their way across the rugged heartland of America in order to survive. As deepening internal divisions threaten to tear the gang apart, Arthur must make a choice between his own ideals and loyalty to the gang who raised him. As deepening internal divisions threaten to tear the gang apart, Arthur must make a choice between his own ideals and loyalty to the gang who raised him. After many struggles in a world where outlaws are more ghosts than people, Arthur, who is usually the enforcer, the right hand and jack of all trades of the gang, contracts tuberculosis, which at the time was a death sentence. Now, there are two paths that you can take as a player to develop Arthur's story: low honor and high honor. The scene of today is only attainable if you take the high honor route, which to be fair is probably the one that was the most intended by the developers when you see all of the helping people content that there is in the game. In this honorable road, following his diagnosis, Arthur will start to take the path of redemption, if you will, starting to help people with the remainder of his time, and especially help the people that are close to him that deserves help. The ones that he considers his family, if you will. So, talking about John and his family, for example, but also Charles or Sadie. However, inevitably the sickness progresses, and death comes closer and closer. And as death approaches for Arthur, the gang is also tearing apart, which is very tragic. Because the gang was always Arthur's guiding light, if you will, his purpose, his reason to live. And as the one thing that he blindly followed his whole life is tearing itself apart, here comes this scene. That, by the way, triggers after Arthur helped yet another man in need. And this scene not only is much needed for Arthur at that moment, it's going to change our man for the remainder of his life in an extremely emotional way, but also in an unexpectedly philosophical way. Let's see that together. First, a word on the setting. It feels really peaceful. The weather is calm and sunny, you can hear the frogs and crickets in the background, and there's a very light music accompanying the beginning of the scene. But as things get more personal, it vanishes. There are two notable behaviors that Arthur is adopting here that are quite interesting. First, he quickly changes subject when it comes to how he's doing to deflect it on how the sister is doing. He's also using irony as a form of defense mechanism. The second very noticeable behavior is how he flaps his arms around and nervously looks away. To sum it all up, he feels uncomfortable. Because of the coughing that must be painful, no doubt, but also because he feels uncomfortable appearing diminished in front of someone else. Keep that in mind. It's very important for Arthur's psyche. Because throughout the whole game, Arthur is the biggest workhorse for everyone, especially for the gang. For real, he does everything for pretty much everyone. And yes, he receives love and appreciation from people that he needs it from, especially Dutch. But when you think about it, when does Dutch remind him that he's like a son for him, or stuff like that? When he needs something from Arthur. Our man is conditioned to be loved when he's needed and when he's doing things for others. He's conditioned to think that he needs to be a workhorse to be loved. And in a diminished state, in weakness, he shields himself with irony and humor because he thinks that he's not lovable if he's not working. In other terms, weakness means no more love. However, the sickness takes over anyway, and the coughing gets too intense to hide. Besides, the sister is a holy figure, and one that has already shown kindness and compassion before. All in all, a good candidate to make Arthur open himself.
I'm dying, sister.
Okay?
Yeah, I got TB. I got it. Beating a man to death for a few bucks. I've lived a bad life, sister.
See how he keeps on shielding himself? By talking about dying in a blunt way like it meant nothing for him? Not only that, he also shields himself by talking himself down, depreciating himself, and he also looks away to avoid the sister's eyes as he's doing so. He fools no one though, he's hurt, but for now he's still tense and won't confide. But that is why the sister's character is a great foil to Arthur. She doesn't judge him. She's used to the repentance, and the sick ones by the way. She doesn't get away when Arthur starts coughing, she helps him. But most importantly, she makes him re-question his view of himself. And by doing that, she gets closer and closer to Arthur and also closer and closer to the root of his sadness. And she gets Arthur's attention. Notice that he finally looks at her. She's succeeding, and little by little, she's making him drop his guard.
You're always helping people and smiling.
I had a son. He passed away. I had a girl who loved me. I threw that away. My mama died when I was a kid. And my daddy, well, I watched him die. And it weren't soon enough.
He's still talking ill of himself and protecting himself, sure, but he's also delving really deep into his personal life. Don't get fooled by his careless attitude. The things he's talking about are very deep emotional subjects for him. His son, his former girlfriends, his parents. He barely talks about it with anybody else in the whole game. The shield is maintained, but there are cracks that are starting to form. In front of the sister's understanding, compassionate and guiding presence, Arthur asks for help. This is a huge progression in him allowing someone else in his space. He recognizes that he's lost. As we've established before, and as his end draws closer and closer, Arthur helps people more and more. And the sister seemed to be trying to guide him more towards that path. She's teaching her the ways of altruism. And thus, by ingraining that philosophical thought in his head, she tries to give him purpose, meaning, and ultimately peace of mind. But he retorts that he doesn't believe in nothing, trying to figure out that attempt for meaning. He still feels lost and full of doubt. But the ever more understanding sister reassures him that she has her doubts at times too, but altruism always ends up breaking her out of the fog and guiding her to the light. She lives for others, and that, in and on itself, is enough. And at that moment, she finally made it. She breached through the shield.
But then I meet someone like you, and everything makes sense.
You're too smart for me, sister. I guess I'm afraid.
Oof. There it is. Why does it hit so hard? For all the reasons previously exposed and the progressive build-up, I'm not denying that, but here's a couple more reasons why. Look as he takes one last metaphorical breath of self-depreciating, followed by an actual deep breath to emotionally get himself ready before finally letting himself go to reach his hand out to someone. Then he gathers his courage for a second and lets it go. I'm afraid. His eyes when he says it, that overflowing emotion, that desperate need for reassurance and warmth. Bear in mind, this is the manliest man you could think of, right? A real tank, someone that has done the lowest of deeds, but also the greatest feats of strength you could think of. And he's afraid. And it's okay. Finds a bit of reassurance in the sister's words as she pushes one final time Arthur towards the path of altruism. Take a gamble that love exists and do a loving act. The gamble here is the belief that Arthur was talking about earlier. There's a belief to hold on to. Choose to brave the uncertainty of meaning and just love. A belief that Arthur unconsciously already found long time before this scene, because in order to get to this scene, you must have helped a ton of people along the way. And this quote from the sister will allow him to face his death with less fear, as he writes in his journal entry, since he will live the remainder of his life with love as his flag, his guiding light, and his legacy. Oh, man. You know that a fictional character has been done really well when he makes you feel that way. But anyway, that was it for today. I hope you enjoyed the emotional journey, and I'll see you soon for another one.